Okay. Hati loik shemen l'toida. Tanya Rabbi Kiva Omer. Zog the Heilige Rabbi Kiva. Ma tamud loimar bashemen shtei palmim. So it actually is three times bashemen in that pasuk. But the chalas toida. Now we're talking about the three chalos of matzos.
Yesterday's stuff. You're saying that people, a lot of toys are going to come at one time.
A lot of.
Toys,
If they would come at one time.
How many people come at one time?
Why could you be making multiples? It's a big mizbech.
Multiple time.
Yeah. Im al toido yakrivenu, the hikriv al zevach toida chalois matzos belulos b'shemen number one, or kika matzos mushuchem b'shemen number two, v'solis murbeches chalois belulos b'shemen. So the two b'shemens that we're focused on are the chalas matzos belulos b'shemen, or kika matzos mushuchem b'shemen. Those two b'shemen. Bashemen shnei pamim. Ilu loy nemar ela b'shemen echad. If it would only say once b'shemen echad, hayisomer I would say harehu kachol hamenachos. It will be like other mincha. Leloig, one like per yisorin. Achshav shekosav bashemen twice. Have a riboy achar riboy vein riboy achar riboy ela lamayit miyata yakosav lachatzi loig. Freit Gemara riboy achar riboy. There's no extra riboy here. Chad riboyhu, because the main bashemen, you need to tell you b'chlal that there's shemen here. Ela ilu loy nemar bashemen kol ikar. Had it not said bashemen at all, I wouldn't have even need one bashemen to tell me that you need a loik. It's partial like every other mincha. Achshav shenemar bashemen tveimal haribu acharibu and ribu acharibu ela l'mayit. Now Tosfos asks, who said that if you need the first one for Pashup Pshat, that wouldn't be called a Riboy Achar Riboy? As Tosfos says, Zok Tosfos, Chad Riboyhu, the Chad Bashemen Kamar, the Itrich Lugufei, the Ton Shemen, Kichol HaMenachos Beloy, or Bechol HaMenachos Beloy. Tema, the Chiagavna Kari Riboy Achar Riboy, Lo'il Bakoy Mitrabo, the Tanya Mezuzoish, Shemeani Miot Mezuzoish Shtayim, you need one Lugufei. Kishuaimer Mezuzoish, Parsha Shniya, Shein Tabaloim Riboy Achar Riboy. You need one Lugufei. So you see, you do say Riboy Achar Riboy. But here the Gemara wanted to say that even the first one was redundant. To tell us that you only need a chatzi loig for the chalos. Yochol ye chatzi loig zemis chalak l'shloishes minim, because there's chalos, there's rekikin, and there's revicha. So that means 1/3 of a loig. I'm sorry, 1/3 of the half a loig. So 1/6 of a loig per set of breads. Kishoimer bashemen. B'revicha, it tells us the revucha has to also be b'shemen. Shen Talmud loymar, because it's pasha that revucha is always shemen. Rashi says, Ribi shemen b'revucha, she'iten b'shemen, yoyser mi b'shar minim. It tells us that you need more than other minim. I'm sorry, I went to the earlier stick I should look at. Kishoymer b'shemen b'revucha shen Talmud loymar. Sher mitzina shemen b'revucha. So by definition, Revicha means with Shemen. Why did it say Shemen there as well? The teretz is Riba Shemen Revicha. You need to have more Shemen than what its fair share is. Its fair share is 1/3 of the half a loik. But it's Marbid Yoiser, Haketzad, maybe Chatzaloik Shemen Vichaytseyu. That's Yov, 1/3 of the log. Say one half of the half. It means 1/4 of the lug is split 1/8 and 1/8. And then 1/4 of the lug, so that's how it would work. You had 3 sets of breads that were all matzadik. The rekikim and the chalois each got 1/8 of a loik, and 1/4 of a loik was dedicated to the revicha. Omer le Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Akiva I reject your drasha that it's from the extra bashemen that we learn these halachas. Ela chatzi loig shemen l'toida. Have a loig of shemen for the 3 breads of matzos for the carbon toida. Revius shemen, that a nazir requires a revius shemen. The achad asa yoim sheben nida lenida, that is an 11-day ziva period between these seven days of nida, are all halacha l'moshe Sinai. So what does that mean? What does that mean? So how are the half a loig halacha l'moshe Sinai? How is it distributed? So if we look at Rashi, zogt Rashi. The chetzer lechalish v'chetzer l'revucha v'lav mikrasi. Tafim apasuk, which means chetzer lechalish, which is like what the Gemara said, a quarter, sorry, eighth and a quarter. But that's not how everyone learns. Zokt the Rashi Ksav Yad, if we look at the bottom over here, he says, Elachati loik shemen l'toida l'chol aminin u'rvius hashemen l'chol lachmin nafshet weiter. Who does he say this? Someone says it's 1/3 each. Could be true, but the Gershom says 1/3 each, or Tosh says 1/3 each. Someone says 1/3 each. Oh, halacha l'moshe misinai the mischalek b'shava. You could see on the television I'm pointing to the mischalek b'shava legimel minim. So it's split evenly 3 ways. So there's a machlokes. If there's a machlokes and hapsak halacha l'maisa between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Elazar and Azariah, if it's learned out of a limit of a pasuk or if it's from halacha l'moshe Sinai. On the tzad that it's halacha l'moshe Sinai, our Rashi says it's still the same ratio: 1/8 and 1/8 for chalach and for a kikin, and 1/4 for a bucha. But the Rebbe says it would be split 3 ways evenly. Zok the heilige Gemara weiter. Beloig hayamoided. That means every mincha was measured with 1 loig of shemen. We're looking for the makar that every mincha has a loig of shemen. Torah Rabbanan. B'mitzayer aniksiv yisarein bal v'lug. Let's look at all pasuk because we're going to dash in this in detail. It says imdalhu. We're talking about the mitzayer's carbon of dalus. Imdalu ve'nyadim aseges. Now the carbon of a regular mitzayer would be 3 animals. But if he's dal and he can't afford 3 animals, you still need to bring the tnufa of an animal, the tnufa, the chaper, olav, and v'yisarein soilas echad. So let's focus. V'yisarein soilas echad bolol b'shemen, lemincha v'loik shaman. So let's have a look at how the Gemara darshins this pasuk. B'mitarin iksiv yisarein bolol v'lug. To teach us limud al yisarein shatorin loik. We know every mincha requires an yisarein silas, and from this pasuk we learn that every yisarein silas has within a matching look. Divrei chachamim, Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbi Eliezer, afilu mincha shel shishim esroinim ein lo elaluga. We had that in the Mishnah as well. Shenemar lemincha v'loik shaman, which is the same pasuk. So do you say esarin bol v'loik? It's a loik per yisarein, or is it lemincha v'loik shaman? Is it a loik per mincha? No matter how big it is, up to 60. That's right. Rabbi Nechemia, Rabbi Eliezer, ha yisarein bol v'lug my avdalei. What do they use that pasuk to teach us? To tell you that you need a mincha with oil. The Gomer Rachman Elaisi Chadi Yisar. How otherwise? How would I know? This is how you know. I don't need a pasuk to tell us. And you bring an Yisarin. Midigali Rachman Gabi Mitzayra Gimel Karbonos. The Gimel Asrainos by the carbon usher. It says 3 carbonos and 3 asrainos. Hacha the Chad carbon By the ani where there's only one carbon in asham, it makes sense that it should be chari yisarin. So I don't even need any psukim at all. The whole mention of it is extra, and therefore we use it to teach us that it's one loig per isarin. But Ibn Chemi holds I need it. Clearly, you see the Torah is being more lenient with the ani, not demanding from him as much as a carbon as the regular person. So therefore, I'm sorry. Hoyel b'chash rachman alei lasuye bedalus ema loyli boy mincha klal. Maybe it wouldn't need a mincha at all. Doesn't need any soilus at all. That's why it has to mention it. Ve'idich legamre lo yashkacham. There's no havamina that you wouldn't need an isarin at all. Why? Rashi speaks out. Legamre zevach b'loy mincha klal lo ashkachon. You never find that. You don't need a pasuk to tell me that you need to bring the mincha. That's pashut. V'rabanan hayle mincha v'loik shemin my avdilei. So Gemara ahu lemisnadev mincha shalo yivchos midavar aton loik. You should not use any less flour than what would require a loik. And what is that? Umayni isarin. So the minimum size mincha is an isarin sideless. Ve'idich, how would Rab Nechemia and Rab Eliezer know that halacha? Tarti shmas mina. They would know both from that. Side that it's one loik per mincha, no matter how big the mincha is, and side that a minimum size the mincha is in Isarn. Then the Mishnah goes on and says shisha lepar. There is just 3 loig in lepar, arba loig in la'ayil, and shloisha loig in lekeves. Minalon, how do we know that it's 6 loigin? Because all it says umin chasam v'niskem kimudor shloisha esroinim lapar, which is how much flour there is. How do you know how much oil there is? Tichsiv v'niskeyem chatzi ahin. V'niskeyem chatzi ahin yelapar shlishi ahin la'ayil urevis ahin lakeves yoin. So we learned that there will be the same amount of oil as there will be wine. So it says chatzi ahin yelapar. How many loigin are there in a hin? Hin is tracer loigi. There's 12 loigin in a hin. So a half a hin is 6 loigin. So hin tracer loigavin. Dichsiv. How do I know that a hin is 12 loig? This is an interesting limud. Dichsiv, we touched on it yesterday. It says shemen zayis hin, referring to the amount of shemen zayis that they made the shemen hamishcha out of. Uchsiv, it says, referring to the shemen hamishcha, shemen mishchas kodesh yezeh lili darisechem. Zeh means 7 plus 5. There were 12 loig. Zeh begematria treishavin. That's how I know it was 12 loig. Well, we know 12. How do we know it was loig? Maybe it was 12 avrias. So for that we have an important Rashi. Zokt Rashi. Begematria tracer ava. Vikashalach. Emar tracer avias. Who said it's 12 loigin? Haloi kasha. The smallest share you find mentioned in the Torah is a loig. So if it says 12, it must be referring to 12 loig. So 12 loig is a hin, and therefore a half a hin would be 6 loig. Gewaltig. Zogt de heilige Gemara weiter. One second, I have to figure out. Oh, here it is. Shloisha umech tzol menorah. 3.5 loig for the menorah. Chatzi loig l'chol ner. How do we know? This is a fascinating Gemara. How do we know that it's a half a loig per ner? The Tana Rabbanan may erev ad boiker. The ner has to light from the evening until the morning. Tein lo midasa. Put in enough oil. Shetehedei lekes v'leches me erev ad boiker. Dover achar me erev ad boiker. So let's look. Let's look what this means. Put in enough that it should last from the evening until the morning. there is no, I don't see that there is any Rashi on it. Let me see. No, there is no Rashi. Okay, weiter. So put in enough that it should last the night. And how do we know what that is? We're going to soon see. Dover acher me'ervad boiker is ein loch avoida sheksheir me'ervad boiker. There is no other avoida that's kosher after to do after the Talmud Shabbat Arbaim in the evening that will last until the morning. Elazu b'vad hadlokas habenoira. V'shir chachamim and the chachamim were mishayir chatzi loik me'urta v'atzarfa.
Which time of the year?
Oh, so they made it work for the longest night of the year. Now the question is, what do they do in the shorter nights? In Tammuz, so it burnt more into the day, and Rashi addresses that, huh? That's what either use a thicker wick or they just let it run longer. And let's have a look. So let's finish up the Gemara. How did they get to this number? How did they figure this out? Zakmar Ikad Army Milamaila Lamata Shiaru. And there's two pshatim in this. The most pshat of pshat is they first put in a loig and they realized it was lasting too long. So then they reduced it. And then they reduced it until it lasted till the morning. They put in a quarter of a loig. And then when they saw it ran out early, they added to it. Right. Which means at first they started with too much. We didn't want to waste, so we did it little by little. There's another pshat actually in the Moshe of Rashi, in the Ksav Yad Rashi, who he brings in a second pshat, that you're allowed to put in the first sheet holes, you're allowed to put in less if you want to, and use thinner wicks, but you're not allowed to put in more. And the other man knows, no, you can put in more, but you can't put in less. So the problem that we have is, well, there's a couple of issues, but first let's see Rashi. Pichsu at sheshiru adover shlo yitzorch yoyser michat zilug afilu beleil orach v'cheinos afilu beleil kotzer. They put in enough oil for a long night in the winter, and that's the same amount of oil they put even for the short nights in Tammuz. So what do they do with the extra oil? Umashenishtai beboiker zoyrek lechutz. They would dispose of it, or v'ikadami bekaitza yoyser psila ava. They would use a thicker wick so it would burn more, like you mentioned. So the oil should also be used up first thing in the morning in the summer as well. So the question is, those nights there wasn't enough. Doesn't the Torah say there has to be enough for the whole night? So how could you play such games? So he brings down from Mefarshim that could be they didn't do it with the menorah. They just did it with chulin to check it out. But even for that cost mamoinim.
Well, man, you got to try it.
But the question, even there, how did they experiment? Did they experiment with starting with too much or too little? And we'll have the same as for. Do you want is the Torah chasam mamoinai or is it anis b'makam ashiris? I'm sorry. No, you tested it not with shemen of kodesh. You tested it with chulin. Well, you're just doing a scientific experiment to see how long oil lasts. You don't need to do that in the menorah. Once you figured it out, then you apply it to the menorah. Yeah. Zog to Gemara weiter. Zog to Heilige Mishnah. Ma'arvin nichse parim and nichse elim. If you have the nesachim of parim, you could mix it with the nichse elim. And Rashi tells us because the concentration of oil to the ratio of oil to flour was the same. It was the same consistency, so you could be makav it all together because you didn't take a kmitza from those menachos. They were all burnt on the mizbeach. Nische kvasim and nichse kvasim. They have a more watery, frequent consistency. They have more oil for each bit of flour. So you can mix kvasim with kvasim, but you can't mix kvasim with parim or elim. Shal yochid v'shal tzibur, even a carbon yochid with a carbon tzibur. Shal yoim v'shal amish, because you're allowed to be makrib nesachim for a carbon even days later. Aval ein ma'roven nische kavashim and nichse parim ve'elim, because they're of a different consistency. So let's just quickly mention what that consistency is. So he said, Rashi teaches us that there's 2 loigin per isarin by the parim and the elim, because we said you need shisha loigin lapar, and how much silas was there? Shloisha asroinim. So if you have 6 lug for 3 asroinim, then it's 1 loig, then it's 2 loig per isarin, right? And that was the same ratio as they had by the elim. But by the kfosim, it's 3 loig per isarin. So there's a higher consistency of oil to flour, so therefore you couldn't mix them. Zog the Mishnah weiter. Vim bolalon elu b'fnei ve'elu b'fnei. What if you mix the oil with the flour of the mincha for the kvasim, and you mixed oil with the flour of the mincha for the parim? So each individual mincha had the right consistency. And then v'nisarvu, and then they got mixed together. Ksherim, that will be kosher because each mincha was already made with the right consistency. However, very important to note, this is totally in the machlokes we had on Daf Chav Gimel, I think, right? Because Ratosh says, "Karabanan the pligi aled Rabbi Yehuda b'Kol Mitraba the Amri Charev shenisar b'Bavel Yakriv." If you mixed 2 menachos together, one was more moist, one was dry, you don't say that the dry one sucked away from some moisture from the moist one, and therefore the moist now doesn't have enough, its consistency is off. Once it's done, you're good. But if you just had the flour and the oil, but you didn't mix them together in each micha, you mixed it all together, now the consistency is going to be off on both sides. Therefore, they're possible. Hakeves abba ma'imer. When they brought the kohen oimer, they brought a keves with it. I believe it was an oila. Even though it had double the amount of flour, it had the same amount of oil. So there was an isaron, there was 2 isaronis of flour, but there was only 1 loig of shemen and only 1 loig of oil, of wine. We have a little bit of a problem, because we just said that you're allowed to mix the menachos of parim with the menachos of elim. The problem is, by chalovim, it says viktiroi. The lashon pasuk is looking into the viktiria kayin hamizbecha lechem ishel Hashem. Hiktiroi lashon yachid, meaning you're not allowed to mix chalovim together. Shelo yarav chalovim bechalovim. So huadin, you shouldn't be able to mix the menachos with the menachos. The burnt on the mizbech, you have to keep each carbon separately. That's a steer to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah shouldn't read lechatchila. Our Mishnah should read b'diavad. So v'iktiru means lechatchila shelo yeyar, but it doesn't become possible. Our bride says lechatchila you shouldn't, but b'diavad if you did, it will be kosher. Im nisarvu kamar. Fragt gemara data, you cannot say pshat like that, because ihachi, where it says ve'ein ma'arvin nischei kvasim and nichsei parim ve'elim, if it's only if it's saying if we're saying if that's lechatchila loy, then this must be even b'diavad loy. Va'afil ve'ein ma'arvin nischei kvasim nichsei parim ve'elim va'afil nisarveu nami loy, even b'diavad it's possible. The problem is Vami de Katani Seifa Bolan Ela B'fnei Atzman. Ve'ela B'fnei Atzman is Aru Ksherin. If it says there it's Ksherin B'di'evet, Mashma de Lechatchila, when it was talking about Purim with Elim, Michlal Dereisha Lechatchila and Gansin Ka'amar. So I besides strict Shver, Viktiru says it shouldn't be Motor Lechatchila. Amar Abaye, because of that, took the Abaye Anai Pshat. Hachi Kamar. Our Mishnah that says Ma'arvin is not speaking about the flour and oil. It's speaking about the wine. Ma'arvin Yenon. you could mix the wine of the par with the wine of the ayil. Wine is wine. But that's only im nis'ar of sultan v'shemnon. Only if you mix the soilus and this one, if the shemen and the soilus got wrongfully mixed together. Why were they not allowed to be mixed together? Because it says viktiru. If they were already mixed together and it's kosher b'diavad, then it's mutar lechatchila to mix the wine together. We have to firois, but you cannot mix the wine of the kvasim with the wine of the parim. Why not? Because if you mix the mincha together already, it would be possible. So you can pass the wine. You got to save the wine for kosher and menachos. You're telling me yayin lechatchila you shouldn't mix together? That means lechatchila. Why should you mix together? Even if the soilus was not mixed together, you tell me you cannot mix the wine together unless the soilus was already mixed. But time we learned, and this price is talking about mixing the parim with the kvasim. That it's also to do b'soilus v'shemen. Avol yayin even by kvasim and parim ma'arvin lechatchila. Ella Amar Abaye, and that's speaking before it's mixed. Ella Amar Abaye, we have to regroup and have a whole loop shot. The brisa that says Ma'arvin, that says B'medavar Ma'murim, you can't mix B'soilos V'shemen of a Yain Ma'arvin. That's Heicha the Ihukter Sultan V'shabdon Ma'arvin Yain L'chetchila. That the brisa is V'yain L'chetchila. Aval Yain Ma'arvin is speaking. If not only was the soilas and the shemen of the mincha of the par and kevis oil mixed, it was already put on the mizbeach. It was already put on the mizbeach. So let's say the par and the oil. So then yain lechatchila. But what about hechad huktar? It was just im nisar salt of shemen. It was mixed together in soilas and shemen, but it wasn't put on the mizbeach yet. That's what our mission is talking about. Ma'arvin nami yenon. That's what our mission says, that you could mix the imlav, but if it's not mixed, ein ma'arvin. Why? Dil ma'osi li'aruve soilus v'shemen lechatchila. Because we're afraid if you mix the wine, you're going to mix the oil, and that you're not supposed to do lechatchila. So let's go through the Mishnah. The first case is you're allowed to mix the wine if the soilus and the shemen of the par and the aisle were already mixed. But you should not mix the wine of parim and kvasim, because if they were mixed, it would be possible already. But if after they were already individually mixed and then they got mixed together, then you'd be able to mix the oil. Okay, gewaltig. Zog the Gemara. Keves haba in a oimer, although there's two shiurim of flour, there's only one shear of oil and wine. Let's have a look at the pasuk inside. It says by the Omer, instead of a regular Yisroim from Mincha, it's two Yisroim. Belula b'Hashem ishay l'Hashem reach nichayach v'niskoi with a hey. V'niskoi, so it's spelled with a hey v'niskah, but we pronounce it v'niskoi yayin revi'asin. You see, there's only one revi'as of yayin. So let's have a look at how the Gemara dashes this pasuk. It's a double mincha, meaning there's two esroinis. So too there'd be a double dose of wine. There's only one revi'as, not two. You don't double the wine doesn't get mixed with the flour. Maybe you still use 2 loigin of oil because that gets mixed with the 2 yisroinos of flour. How do you see from viniskoi that the oil also should only be a revius? Where do you see that from the pasuk? Omar Abelazar, iksiv viniskoi with a hey, vikarinon viniskoi. Ketzad. Niska, the mincha, is kiniskoi de yayin. Ma yayin is only a revius because the Torah says so. Beferish, Avshem and Nami is going to be a revius. Amar B'Yochanan, a very interesting chiddush. We know the halach is if you shecht most carbon shaloi l'shema, you continue with the carbon. Ela shaloi alu l'baylam l'shem chayva. And we know that the machlekes in the Mishnah, but it can even apply to a carbon asham. Amar B'Yochanan, asham mitzoyra sheshachta shaloi l'shemai. What happens if you shechted an asham mitzvah shaloi l'shemai? So we know the carbon is kosher. Ela shaloi alu l'baylam l'shem chayva. The question is, when you fear it ice, you have to fear it ice l'shem asham, right? L'shem asham. But ton nesachim, you would need a sachim. You know why? Shem i'at omer kain pasaltai. What are you going to? You're not going to bring the sachim with it, and you're going to treat it like a different type of asham. A different type of asham you can't bring if no one is mechuyev it. So you have to finish it up like an asham nazir for it to be kosher, even though it won't be. Even like an asham kosher, I'm sorry. Even though it won't be all about Hashem chayva, but you still need to bring in the sachim with it. Matgavar benashir bagada elamayata keves haba moimer. Now that you can say this, you saw that you got to finish it up the right way. So how about the keves haba moimer? Sheshachta shaloi l'shmai. They shechted the carbon not l'shem daimer. Are you going to tell me Taim and Chasek Fula you need two Israelites because that's what the carbon that was brought with the armor would have needed? And you know what? If you say that, you got to say also Tamid Shel Shachar Sheshachta Shaloi L'Shmai Yeton Shnei Gezirin B'Kayin Echad. Because the halacha was you needed to bring two pieces of wood with to burn the carbon Tamid on, and one kohen brought it, and in the after why Shemiyat Taim came pas Lasai. And v'tamid shabei ne'bayim sheshachtu shlo lishma yeton shnei gzir b'shnei kahanim because that's how it was done with two kahanim. And again, shemiyat ha'omer kain. If you don't say that, twas lasai. So zok Rabbi Yochanan, in Echanami, yeah, you do. In Echanami, you do. So why didn't Rabbi Yochanan mention though? I'm sorry, it's not Rabbi Yochanan. It is Rabbi Yochanan. Why did it only mention Asham Mitzayr? He picked Asham Mitzayr, but who did would apply across the board. Rabbi Abba Omar, Rabbi Abba says no. There's a very big difference. The Talmud shall shachar and shall be narbayim, and the carbon, the kevis that's brought with the omer, they're carbon oilos. They're carbon oilos. Loy chazul oilos chayva carbon oilos nadava. They could become an oilos nadava if they're brought shalol lishma, and therefore you don't say they're psulos if they're not ois kafirt the way they were originally intended. Elahacha by the asham, you can't bring an asham nadava. Iloi muk mislei mil say asham nadava meika. So Rav is saying that Rabbi Yochanan's halacha maybe only applies to the asham mitzayra, but it wouldn't apply to these others, and that's why he said it by the asham mitzayra because it only applies there. Tanya kavasid Rabbi Yochanan asham mitzayra sheshachta shaloi l'shmoi oy shaloi nasan midamoi al gabe b'hainos, or he didn't put the dam in the bottom, so that makes it possible. Harezu oila legabe mizbeach. It goes, it's brought, it's not a carbon oil, it's brought on the mizbeach like an osham, but v'ton nesachim v'tzarch osham achar latiroi, but to be matter this mitzayra, you'll need another carbon osham. Kavaltik, so we were zoicha to finish that peitas, and tomorrow, B'ez Hashem, we will learn Daf Tzadik. Shkoyach.